In this video, I want to show how to install, configure, set up, and secure Filebeat so that it can be used with Elasticsearch and Kibana version 8. Filebeat is a very useful tool to ingest a wide range of file sources for DevOps analysis. In a few days, I will be releasing a part 2 to this video. Part 2 will focus on configuring email alerts and notifications on top of Filebeat. But for this video, I just want to focus on getting things up and running. This video assumes you already have Elastic and Kibana installed. If you haven't done that yet, I will leave a link in the description of this video to another video that shows you how to get Elastic and Kibana up and running. The other thing we need is a new server that we will be installing Filebeat on. I spun up a new installation of Ubuntu 20.04 here in this window. During this video, I will also install the Apache web server to this machine so that I can demonstrate an example of how Filebeat can ingest logs of installed applications. So before we begin, I want to say that if you find the contents of this video helpful, then give this video a like. And if you want to stay on top of the videos as we release them, then you can subscribe to this channel. Alright, let's get started. Let's install Filebeat to this new instance of Ubuntu 20.04. I'm going to pull up the installation instructions. So I'm going to use the apt-get approach, which you can find on the Elastic website under the documentation for Filebeat. And it's simply just get the public signing key, install this dependency, update the repository information, and then update and run Filebeat. So I'm going to copy all 4 of these commands and paste them into one bash script so I can run it all at once. So let's open up a bash script. You can call this file anything you want. All right, and I'll just paste all 4 of those commands in here. And I'll just run it. So it might take a moment, so I'll pause. Okay, installation has been complete. So if I go to the etc Filebeat directory, in here you will see some of the default configuration files or the template files that Filebeat comes with. And let's open up one of them. This filebeat.yaml is our main configuration file. So once we're in here, I'll explain the options that are most relevant to us. So the first option would be the filebeat.inputs. And in this section, we can list all the types of data inputs that we want Filebeat to ingest. And you can see in this YAML file that Filebeat has already given us an example of an input type to start from. The first type of input that we will ingest is of the type file stream. And specifically, we're going to look in the var log directory for all files that end with the .log extension. And this type here, actually, there's many different types of logs you can ingest. If we go to the Filebeat website, I have a tab opened here, configure inputs. When you're configuring inputs, these are all the different types that you can consume. So file stream is the one we're going to demonstrate in this video, but there's a lot more that you can ingest, each with different options to configure. So for example, if you want to ingest logs from Mosquito Broker, you would have to set the type MQTT, and then there will be options specific to MQTT that you can configure, right? And they're all listed in here. Okay, or if, let's see what other options, yeah, there's like so many. If you want to ingest HTTP JSON, then the type you need to set is of type HTTP JSON, and there are all these options that you can configure. So if you scroll down, these are all the different options you can configure for the HTTP JSON type. But we'll keep things simple for now and just focus on the file stream. And these are all the options. You can see all the options available for FileStream on this page here, right? Many of them we don't need to set for now because we're doing a quick demo, right? So, all right, so what are the properties we would need for FileStream? Well, we would have to give an ID for every single type of input, and that ID should be unique. So I'll leave this as is. I believe enabled, if we delete this line, then it will be enabled is defaulted to true, or you can just explicitly change it to true, right? Now we could add more directories to monitor, but I'm not going to do that for now. I'll just keep it simple like this. So moving on to this filebeat.config.module section, this section is very similar to the filebeat.input section just above. The difference is that in this section, we can list the file types that we want to ingest in separate YAML files underneath the modules.d directory. And Filebeat constantly watches or observes this directory for changes. And when there are changes, Filebeat will automatically load those changes into its system and report those to Elastic and Kibana. Whereas any file types that we've specified in this section over here, these require a systemctl restart. Okay, so I'm going to actually enable config.modules because there are some file types that I want to ingest later on during runtime. So I'll demonstrate that a little bit later. We'll choose a reload period of 10 seconds. Okay, moving on. Oh, right. I do want to set up dashboards. So what happens here is that if we go to our Kibana, and if we click on dashboards over here, we're going to see that this section here is empty. By setting this to true, later on, we're going to run the setup command, and the setup command will load into Kibana and Elastic a lot of different lenses and dashboards that become useful for us to monitor or review a lot of the logs that get fed into the system. Okay, so this is optional, but it's a really good idea to turn on. Okay, I'm gonna specify our Kibana URL. Okay, so this URL is basically just taken from this browser here. And let's specify our Elastic connection. I am using commercially signed certificates. And I'll use the Elastic super user. So the first thing we're going to be doing is running a setup command. And because setup is a one-time activity, I don't mind using super user credentials here. So these are the same credentials that I use to log into Kibana with when I need super user access. But when we use Filebeat to publish ongoing event data to Elastic, Filebeat should use a less privileged user. That way, if this server is compromised, at least bad actors will not gain access to the super user account. But for now, because we need to do a one-time setup, I'm just going to use the super user. And I think that should be it for now. So let's go ahead and run the setup command. So I'm going to go into USR directory. Oh, nope, this is not the right one. Yeah, so the USR share Filebeat and then the binary directory. And in here will be some of the commands that come with the installation of Filebeat. So I'm going to run the Filebeat command. Then we're going to run the, before we even run the setup, we should test our configuration file for any errors. Whoops. /c etc filebeat.yaml and path.home. So the path.home is the directory where all our Filebeat commands are. Okay, and I'm also going to state the path.data because eventually we're going to set up a key store to store some sensitive information, and I will put that in the varlib filebeat directory. I noticed on some of my colleagues' machines that they don't need these two extra flags, path.home and path.data, but for whatever reason, I seem to need it on my system. So I'm going to press enter, and this will just test the configuration file. Okay, configuration seems okay. Let's also test the connection to Elastic and Kibana. If I do output. Okay, so everything seems to be okay here. This is actually the address to our elastic.evermite.net server. Okay, so if you're using self-signed certificates, you might see some warnings instead, but that's completely fine. All right, and just like that, we should be able to run the setup command. And it's the same as the test output and test config commands, but we just change those two options to setup. Now, before I run it, right, we can see that our dashboard here is empty. After running the setup, there should be dashboards in here. So I'm going to let this thing run, and it might take a moment or so, so I'm going to pause for a moment. Looks like the setup is complete. So now if we go to Kibana, and if I refresh this dashboard page, we can now see a whole lot of dashboards available to us. And each of these dashboards reflect different services that you could potentially install on your server. Okay, the other thing we should also check is if we go to Stack Management, click on Index Management, under Data Streams, we should see there's now a Filebeat data stream here. You click on the index here, click on this, and you can see that a lot of the schema or mappings have been set up. Oh, it might take a while to load because the mappings could be quite extensive. Oh, there we go. Right, so you can see the mappings are here now. All right, so we've got Filebeat set up. Oh, one more thing we can check is under the Discover tab, we should also see an option here for Filebeat. Prior to setup, this option would not have been here. Okay, so I think at this point, we're almost ready to enable and run Filebeat. Actually, I just remembered, before we actually enable and run Filebeat, we need to create a less privileged user for Filebeat to use. Let's go to Stack Management, and actually, even before we do that, I should pull up the instructions on what are the privileges needed for that less privileged user. And here on the Filebeat documentation, there's a section for creating a publishing user, and the publishing user needs a role with these privileges. Right? So we're going to create a role with these privileges and then assign that role to a user. Okay, so let's go to our security roles, and we'll create a role called Filebeat Publisher. And we will, let's see, what are the privileges? Monitor, read index life cycle management, read underscore pipeline. So those are things that we need. Read ILM, read pipeline, and what else? We need the create doc on the Filebeat index, Filebeat create doc, and let's create that role. All right, let's assign that role to a user. Create user, and the username can be anything we want. I'll kind of keep it the same. I'll keep it the same as the role name, full name. I'll just use the same thing. Email address, it doesn't matter because I don't intend on sending myself a password or anything. So password, I'll just pick something easy like ABCD1234. because I don't ever plan on logging in with this user with these credentials. But in your production environment, probably use a much more secure password. Let's assign this role that we just made and create the user. All right. And at this point, I could just go into the Filebeat file, and I could just replace the username with Filebeat-publisher and password ABCD1234, systemctl enable and start, and Filebeat would start loading information into Elastic. But I think I prefer to use an API key as opposed to login credentials like this. So let's go ahead and do that. I will go to, we can't create the API keys through here. We actually need to use the dev tools. So let's do that. I'm going to hide this hint, and let me copy the command. Okay, so what this command is saying is we're going to ping the Elastic REST API endpoint called security API key grant. And we're going to log in with the user Filebeat publisher, and this is the password associated with this user. Because we're using the grant type password, so we have to specify the password here. And by doing that, it's going to create an API key with the ID Filebeat publisher, or the name Filebeat publisher. So let's go ahead and do this. And this is the API key, or this is the API key. And this is the base 64 encoded version of this API key. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to save it to a notepad. There we go, paste it in here. And I actually need to do a little bit of massaging of this. Let me take the ID, and I'm going to take this API key over here. Right? And I could take this string and paste it directly in here because it's ID colon API key, ID colon API key. So I could paste it in here, but I don't like leaving sensitive information in plain text in a file like this, because when bad actors actually compromise this server and actually gain access to this file, they will also gain access to that API key. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an environment variable here. Okay, so I'm going to create an environment variable later called es_API_key. And I'm going to use the Filebeat key store to encrypt that environment variable and load it in here at runtime. That way, bad actors will never gain access to that key simply by looking at this file. All right, so let's quit this. Let's now go to USR share Filebeat. Go into the binary directory, and let's click on. In fact, it's the same as our setup command, but the difference is we replace the word setup with key store, add, and the environment variable that we want to create, API key. Hit enter. You don't have key store yet, so yes, let's go ahead and create it. Now paste in the value, copy, paste, and there we go. So now we should be using the Filebeat publisher user to connect to Elastic. So systemctl enable Filebeat, systemctl start Filebeat, and we'll give it a moment to load up. Or actually, once it loads up, we should be able to see it under the Discover tab. Right. So after a few minutes, something should load up here. So I'll pause until that happens. So it's been a few minutes and there's still no files loading in here. I took a look at the journal CTL, and what I see here is that there's an error. And I've seen this in all the other beats as well, where there's a 403 error. Filebeat can't seem to do a bulk create. And my solution has always been to update the privileges of the Beat user. So if I go to the users and I go back to this Filebeat publisher user, I find that if I add the editor role, it seems to solve the problem. It's not mentioned in the documentation at all about assigning an extra role to enable this publishing user. So if anyone knows why, just let me know. But for now, if I update this user with the editor role, it seems to work. But before it even works, I need to actually revoke this API key. The reason is when you create an API key, it retains the privileges of when this was initially initialized, right? So just because I've added the editor role to this user, this API key does not acknowledge it. I actually need to destroy this key and recreate it for the new key to pick up the new privileges. So let's go back to DevTools now. I'm going to hit run. And these are our new API keys. So let's paste in here. I'm going to set the same format again. ID colon API key. All right, I'm going to copy this and I'm going to run that key store command again to update the environment variable. Let me just make sure I copy this. Copy. Overwrite, yes. Paste in the key. Systemctl restart. Filebeat service. And now let's go to our Discover tab. And let's see if in a few minutes we start to see records in here. Okay, now we're finally seeing some data in the system. I can also click to the observability area overview. And in this section, we will see a widget here for log events. I can click on show log stream here, or I can go to log stream over here. And I can see the similar information. So this stuff here is basically parsed entries from log files that show up here. Same with this Discover tab. Now let's take a look at some of the dashboards. I mentioned earlier that a lot of these dashboards will be empty because we haven't installed many of these services on our server, services like Salesforce or NetFlow and such. So naturally these dashboards would be empty. But there are some that would be of interest to you. So they would be the syslog dashboard, SSH dashboard, sudo dashboard, and new users and groups dashboard. And I'll give it a moment to load up. But I expect all of these dashboards to be empty right now because we haven't actually enabled Filebeat to read logs from the system, right? And what I mean by that is if we go over to our server here, if we look at our filebeat.yaml file, right now we are only going to read log files in here. But if you also recall, we have this modules folder that's actively being monitored and is looking for any YAML files in here. So let's go in there. And in here, these are all the module files for many different types of services that you could potentially install on your server. But one of the things that's already that comes with Ubuntu are just system log files. And let's open up this one, system And you can see that we can enable the monitoring of syslog files. So I'll change this to true. And authorization logs. I'll change this to true. And with that said, I'm going to enable this file by removing the .disabled extension. Because this filebeat.yaml is saying look for anything with a .yaml file extension. So that would be this system CTL, and I shouldn't have to restart the Filebeat service. I think Filebeat should automatically recognize this file, the system.ctl file, and momentarily we should see results in these dashboards. So I'll give it a moment, or let me just hit refresh quickly to see if anything has come in. Okay, so I'll give it a moment. I've waited a few minutes and these are still empty. So I went onto server and I took a look at some of the journal CTL files, and I can already see a lot of issues. So you see all these warnings. If I scroll to the right, it looks like there are permission issues that prevent the indexing of event publisher.event. So let's see if we can resolve that. I've seen this before, and I believe again it's because the documentation on the privileges needed for a publishing user isn't complete. You can see this one entry here where it says if you want to use modules, then you must have this read pipeline privilege. But I think this is still insufficient. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going to go to our stack management, click on roles, and let's find this role. I'm going to increase the privileges here by adding anything related to pipelines, ingest pipeline and manage pipeline. I'm going to ignore the logstash pipeline. I don't think we need that because we're not using logstash just yet. I'm going to update this role. This user Filebeat publisher already has that role, right? So I'm not going to change anything here, but I must revoke this API key and regenerate it so that a new API key will have the new privileges and permissions. So let's generate a new one. All right, let's copy this, paste it into our notepad, and let's recreate what we need. This is the ID. This is the API key, :API key. All right, and we're going to, let's see if I can find, here, let's share Filebeat, binary, and Filebeat, key store, add ES API key. All right, so all the same flags again. And let's go ahead and add this API key. I'm going to copy this. Yes, overwrite the old one, paste this in here. Okay, and now I'm going to go systemctl restart Filebeat. And sometimes this restart of Filebeat can take a minute or two if there's just a lot of things going on in the background, like additional setups or something, or some kind of logging or cache needs to be cleared. But this seemed pretty quick for me this time. And what I'm going to do is take a look at the journal CTL to see if any more warnings happen. All right, So far so good, just mostly infos. So I'll wait a moment to see if, here, let me just bring that Kibana back. So I'll wait a moment to see if anything comes in here. Okay, it's been a few minutes. I can already see data for SSH login attempts. And yeah, you can see that the server is out in the world somewhere. So it's getting spammed by a lot of bots out on the web. Sudo commands, I haven't done anything lately. So let's actually try something. I'll just type sudo echo hello world, and maybe in a moment that will be reported here. And new users, nothing yet, but if I create a new user, and I think hopefully in a moment that information will show up here as well. And for the syslog, let's say I'm just going to add a system log, and we'll see if it shows up in here in a moment. I'll take a look at the journal CTL quickly. Oh, looks like there are still warnings. So if that doesn't work, oh, okay, so there is a syslog issue here. Okay, so let me just wait a moment just to see if anything gets into Elastic. All right, so I can see now also the sudo commands are being reported. New user creations are also being reported here. The syslog still seems to be failing. And I do have a way around this. So it's not ideal, but what I can do is if I go to the filebeat.yaml file, whoops, let me go back here. All right, and I'm going to temporarily disable this less privileged user, or rather, I'm going to actually use a super user. All right, so that's my super user account. I'm going to use the super user to write the first record in here. Okay. And once that first record has been written here, then I will revert back to the less privileged user. Then it seems like that less privileged user can continually publish more information down the road. It's just this initial record that needs to be created by the Elastic user. At least that's what I found from my experimentation. So let's refresh. Okay, I'm going to pause for a moment. All right, so it looks like the syslog is now finally loading in here while using the super user account. I can look for pizza record. Hopefully something shows up. Yep, if I click in here, only one result came back. I think the word pizza should appear here. Yeah, so it's here. Okay, so now let's revert back to the less privileged user. Systemctl restart Filebeat. Okay, and I am going to clear this filter, and let's do another system log. And let's say chocolate. All right, and hopefully this record will also appear in here in a moment with us using the less privileged user. So I'll wait a moment. Okay, it's been a few minutes. Let's see if chocolate appears. Whoops, maybe case sensitivity. Okay, good. All right, so it's using a less privileged user. Let me just do one more test to be sure. and I'm not going to restart Filebeat or anything. Let's just see if in a moment that record appears here. Okay, it was actually pretty fast, only a few seconds, and I can already see this record appear here, so I won't even bother filtering for it. So we've got all 4 of these system dashboards working, and just for fun, let's actually get another dashboard working. Let's get the Apache dashboard working. So Apache is a web server, a very popular one, and Filebeat comes with the tools to automatically ingest and parse Apache log files. So right now this dashboard will be empty because we don't have Apache installed on our server here. So let's install Apache. Apache 2 web server. So we'll give it a moment. Okay, Apache has been installed. Let's figure out the IP address of the server. And if I go to our web browser and I'll paste in the URL. There we go. We get the default Apache 2 web page, and this Apache dashboard will remain empty until we enable it in the modules directory. So let's go here, modules, and we see that there is an apache.yaml file. Let's edit that. And I'm going to enable this, true. And also the error logs, true. Okay, let's move this over to apache.yaml, or rename this file. And hopefully without needing to systemctl restart in a moment, we start seeing data in here. But I have a feeling it actually won't work for those same permission issues again. Let me just see. Filebeat. Let's see if we get any warnings yet. Second last line says cannot index but. Right, okay, so I have a feeling it won't work, but I'll give it a few minutes. So I waited a few minutes and only these 2 or 3 records came through, so this doesn't look complete. So I'm going to try that hack again, which is to escalate the user to super user, and then let the super user load 1 or 2 records before reverting back to the less privileged user. Okay, so I'll wait a moment. Okay, this is looking much better now. And now I think I can reduce the privileges again. And I think everything should be fine at this point. Yep. Perfect. So I intentionally generated this 404 error with this URL while using this less privileged Filebeat user. So everything seems to be working. Well, actually, not everything. Another issue I often notice with Elastic is that some of the maps where it's trying to transcribe IP addresses to geolocation, sometimes those seem to fail. So if, like these ones. Yeah, so these 2 maps are empty, but I'm pretty sure there should be data here. And the reason these maps might be empty is because Elastic normally has a data set that matches IP addresses to geographies. And this data set is normally downloaded at the time of installing Elastic. It should automatically be downloaded actually. But I've noticed that in my a lot of times in my installations of Elastic, that automatic download tends to fail. And we can actually double check that by going to our console And there's a command that you can run. Let me just find it. If you ping this endpoint, a get ingest geoIP stats, and you can see that there's one failed attempt at this download. So I have a workaround on how to get this to work. It involves kind of rebooting Elastic a few times and adding a property to elasticsearch.yaml and then removing it. So let's kind of go through that process. Okay, I'm going to SSH to my Elastic server. Then I'm going to go to the elasticsearch.yaml file. And I'm just going to add a line into this file. So give me a second. Copy and then paste in here. Okay, so I'm going to disable the automatic download. I'm going to restart Elastic. Okay, Elastic has been restarted. Now, if I run this endpoint again, all right, it looks like no attempts were made to download the GeoIP dataset. And now I'm going to delete that line that I added. And then I'm going to restart again. Okay, Elastic has restarted. Now if I run this endpoint again, okay, I've confirmed that the new GeoIP dataset has been downloaded. And now if I go to my Apache dashboards, I hit refresh, and I'll do so also with the SSH. And now you can see that the GeoIP enrichment is available. And going to the SSH dashboard, and I've hit refresh on this one. Great, we can see GeoIP enrichments here. You can see that there's all these, I guess, spammers and bots trying to SSH log into our servers. This concludes part 1 of our tutorial on Filebeat. In a few days, we will be releasing part 2, which will focus more on alert rules and email notifications. If you found the contents of this video helpful, then give us a like. If you want to stay on top of the videos as we release them, then consider subscribing to our channel. See you in the next video.